The city of Portland, Oregon, was alive with its usual evening rhythm. The streetlights cast a soft orange glow across the damp pavement, and the sound of raindrops trickling off rooftops blended with the distant hum of passing cars. For most people, it was just another quiet night. But for Emily Carter, the silence carried a weight she couldn't ignore. Emily was 28, a librarian at the Portland Central Library, known among her friends for her love of old books and her habit of jotting down poetry in the margins of worn notebooks. She lived alone in a modest apartment on the second floor of an aging brick building near Hawthorne Boulevard. It wasn't fancy, but it was hers, a place filled with bookshelves, framed photographs, and small potted plants she had struggled to keep alive. That night, Emily had just returned home from her late shift at the library. She hung her raincoat on the hook near the door, slipped out of her damp shoes, and set her keys in the ceramic bowl on the entry table. The rain had left her hair sticking to her forehead, and she brushed it aside before sighing with relief at finally being home. She turned on a lamp in the living room, its warm light spilling over the stack of books she had brought home to catalog. As she walked toward the kitchen, though, a sudden creak made her freeze. The sound had come from the hallway. Emily's heart skipped. She told herself it was just the building settling, old wooden pipes shifting as the rain cooled them. That explanation usually worked, but this time, she was sure she had heard something more deliberate. It had sounded like a footstep. She stood still, listening. The clock ticked on the wall. The refrigerator hummed softly. Beyond that, nothing. No sound, no movement. Shaking her head, Emily let out a nervous laugh. "You've been reading too many mystery novels," she whispered to herself. Still, she walked to the hallway and flipped on the light. The narrow corridor stretched from her living room to the bedrooms, empty and quiet. She stepped through slowly, glancing at the closed doors. Everything looked the same. She even checked the locks on her windows. All secure. By the time she poured herself a cup of tea, she had nearly convinced herself it was her imagination. She settled into the couch, tucking her legs beneath her, and opened one of the library books. The steady patter of rain against the windows began to soothe her. But then, another sound. This time it came from directly above her apartment. A faint, dragging noise, like someone walking slowly, deliberately. Emily frowned. The apartment above hers was supposed to be vacant. The tenant had moved out 2 weeks ago, and she remembered clearly because she had helped carry up a box of books when the moving truck had arrived. Her tea cooled in her hands as she strained to listen. The sound continued for a few seconds, slow, measured steps, and then it stopped. Emily set her mug on the coffee table, stood, and reached for her phone. For a moment she considered calling her landlord, but she hesitated. It was late, and maybe someone was just checking the place upstairs. Maintenance, perhaps. Still, unease settled over her chest like a heavy blanket. Trying to distract herself, she locked the door and returned to the couch. She turned on the small TV in the corner, flipping through channels until she landed on a rerun of an old comedy. The laughter track was oddly comforting, filling the silence. Half an hour later, she began to relax again, until the sound came back. Not above this time, but inside. From the hallway, Emily froze, her eyes snapping to the dark corridor beyond the edge of the living room lamp. She hadn't turned off the hallway light earlier, had she? She was sure she had left it on, but now it was dark, as though someone had switched it off. Her pulse quickened. Slowly, she reached for her phone on the coffee table and dialed her best friend, Daniel Brooks. Daniel lived across the city, in a quiet neighborhood near Forest Park. He was a detective with the Portland Police Department, someone Emily had known since college. If there was anyone she trusted in moments like this, it was him. He answered on the second ring. "Emily, what's wrong? It's late." She tried to keep her voice steady. "Dan, I think someone might be in my apartment." There was silence on the line for a beat, then his voice sharpened. "Stay where you are. Don't move. I'm coming over right now. Keep the line open." Emily's grip tightened around the phone. Her breathing felt too loud in the quiet room. She glanced toward the hallway again, half expecting to see a shadow move. But there was only stillness, broken by the faint whisper of rain. Then came the sound, soft, barely audible, but undeniable, footsteps, inside her apartment, and they were getting closer. Emily's fingers trembled as she clutched the phone tighter against her ear. Daniel's steady voice came through again, lower this time, almost a whisper meant to keep her calm. "Emily, listen to me. Don't make a sound. Don't go to the hallway. Stay where you are until I get there." Her heart pounded so hard she could hear it in her ears. Every instinct screamed at her to run, to throw open the front door and rush into the street, but her body felt frozen in place. The footsteps in the hall paused, as though whoever was out there had stopped to listen too. Emily dared not breathe. The silence stretched on, broken only when Daniel's voice returned softly. "I'm on my way. 10 minutes, maybe less. Just stay hidden if you can." Slowly, Emily sank down behind the couch, her phone still pressed to her ear. From there, she had a partial view of the hallway. It was dark, still, and menacing. Then, faintly, she saw it, a flicker of movement, the shadow of something slipping along the wall. Her breath caught in her throat. "Dan, I saw something," she whispered. "Stay quiet," he urged. "Don't let them know where you are." She ducked lower, pressing her back against the couch cushions. Her eyes darted toward the window. Could she climb out? No, it opened to a drop 2 stories down. Not safe. She had no choice but to wait. The minutes dragged like hours, her ears tuned to every creak and shift of the apartment. Once, she thought she heard the faint click of her bedroom door moving. Another time, the subtle scrape of fabric brushing against the wall. Whoever was inside wasn't rushing. They were deliberate, patient, as though they had all the time in the world. Suddenly, her phone vibrated in her hand. A new sound buzzed through the line, the distant blare of a siren. Daniel must have switched on his lights to get through the streets faster. Relief swept through her, but only for a moment. The footsteps started again, louder now, coming down the hallway. Emily's grip on the phone slipped, and it clattered softly against the carpet. The noise must have given her away, because the steps quickened. Panic surged. "Dan," she cried out. "He's coming. I'm 2 blocks away." Daniel shouted. "Stay low, Emily." She scrambled backward on the floor, her eyes wide with terror as a shadow loomed at the end of the hallway. Tall, broad-shouldered, its features hidden in the dark. The figure stopped, as if savoring the moment, and Emily's blood turned to ice. Just then, the shrill wail of sirens grew louder outside, accompanied by the screech of tires pulling up to the curb. The figure hesitated, its head snapping toward the window as flashing red and blue lights spilled into the apartment through the blinds. And then, silence. The shadow was gone. Emily blinked, her body trembling, unsure if she had imagined it. She heard the heavy thud of boots on the stairs, the pounding knock of fists against her door. "Emily, it's me." Daniel's voice rang out. With shaking hands, she scrambled to her feet and rushed to unlock the door. The moment it swung open, Daniel pushed inside, his eyes sharp. She scrambled backward on the floor, her eyes wide with terror as a shadow loomed at the end of the hallway. Tall, broad-shouldered, its features hidden in the dark. The figure stopped, as if savoring the moment, and Emily's blood turned to ice. Just then, the shrill wail of sirens grew louder outside, accompanied by the screech of tires pulling up to the curb. The figure hesitated, its head snapping toward the window as flashing red and blue lights spilled into the apartment through the blinds. And then, silence. The shadow was gone. Emily blinked, her body trembling, unsure if she had imagined it. She heard the heavy thud of boots on the stairs, the pounding knock of fists against her door. "Emily, it's me." Daniel's voice rang out. With shaking hands, she scrambled to her feet and rushed to unlock the door. The moment it swung open, Daniel pushed inside, his eyes sharp and scanning every corner of the room. "Where is he?" Emily pointed toward the hallway, her voice breaking. "He was there. I swear he was there." Daniel drew his gun and moved with swift precision, checking each room, every closet, every corner. Emily stood frozen by the door, hugging herself, listening as his footsteps moved through her apartment. A minute later, Daniel returned, his face grim. "There's no one here." Her knees went weak. "No, I saw him, Dan. He was standing right there." Daniel holstered his weapon and gently guided her to the couch. "I believe you," he said firmly, his eyes locking with hers. "Something happened here tonight. Someone was inside, but they're gone now." Emily buried her face in her hands, the adrenaline still coursing through her. "Why me? Why here?" Daniel hesitated before answering. "That's what I'm going to find out." But even as he said it, his gaze flicked toward the dark hallway, and for the first time, Emily saw a hint of worry in his expression, a worry that told her the nightmare wasn't over. The apartment felt smaller now, as though the walls had crept inward while Emily and Daniel sat in the dim glow of the lamp. Daniel stayed alert, his posture rigid, his sharp eyes never straying far from the hallway. Emily clutched a blanket around her shoulders, shivering despite the warmth of the room. She couldn't erase the image of the figure standing in the dark, watching, waiting. Daniel finally broke the silence. "Emily, I need you to tell me everything. From the very beginning. Every sound, every detail you noticed." She swallowed hard and began to explain. The creak in the hallway when she first got home, the dragging footsteps from the vacant apartment upstairs, the light in the hallway switching off, and finally the shadow that appeared just before Daniel arrived. He listened intently, nodding now and then, piecing the story together in his mind. "The apartment above you," he said finally. "You're certain no one lives there now?" Emily nodded quickly. "Yes. The tenant moved out. I even saw the moving truck." "Then whoever was up there tonight shouldn't have been," he muttered. He pulled out his phone and dialed a number, asking dispatch to send a patrol car to sweep the building and check the upper floor. When he hung up, Emily's nerves eased slightly, but only slightly. "Dan," she whispered, her voice trembling. "What if they come back?" He looked at her, his expression softening. "That's why I'm here, and I won't let anything happen to you." For the first time that night, Emily felt the smallest spark of safety. Daniel had always been steady, back in college when she panicked over exams, later when her mother passed and she thought her world had ended, and now, sitting in her apartment after a nightmare she couldn't explain. She trusted him, but even trust couldn't erase the unease gnawing at her. Minutes later, 2 uniformed officers arrived, sweeping the building with flashlights. They checked the upstairs apartment, every window and corner, but found nothing. "No sign of forced entry," one of them reported. She trusted him, but even trust couldn't erase the unease gnawing at her. Minutes later, 2 uniformed officers arrived, sweeping the building with flashlights. They checked the upstairs apartment, every window and corner, but found nothing. "No sign of forced entry," one of them reported. "Windows are locked. Place is empty." Daniel's jaw tightened. "Check again in the morning, broad daylight. I want to know if there's any way someone could have slipped in." After they left, Emily sat quietly while Daniel paced the room. His mind was working, she could tell, every detail examined like pieces of a puzzle. "Whoever it was," he said slowly, "they weren't here to rob you. They had plenty of chances to grab something. They didn't. They just watched." The words made Emily shudder. Watched. The idea that someone had stood in her hallway, listening to her every movement, filled her with a fear she could barely contain. "Why would anyone do that?" she whispered. Daniel didn't answer right away. He knelt in front of her instead, his steady hand resting lightly on hers. "I don't know yet, but we're going to find out." Emily's eyes searched his, and for a moment, she wasn't just looking at her best friend. She was looking at the only anchor she had in the storm of fear. There was something unspoken in his gaze too, protectiveness that went deeper than duty, deeper than friendship. But before either of them could say more, a sharp sound cracked through the night. A thud, distant but clear, from somewhere upstairs. Emily flinched. Daniel was already on his feet, gun in hand, moving toward the door. "Stay here," he ordered. But Emily grabbed his arm, her voice trembling. Dan, what if it's him again? He glanced back at her, and this time his eyes carried both reassurance and determination. Then tonight, we're not letting him slip away. He stepped into the hallway, leaving Emily's apartment door ajar. She stood just inside, her heart pounding, straining to hear. The building was silent, save for Daniel's careful footsteps moving toward the stairs. And then, another sound. The unmistakable echo of footsteps above, retreating quickly toward the far end of the upper hall. Daniel shouted, "Police! Stop where you are!" Emily's breath caught. There was no reply, only the hurried thundering of steps, then silence. Daniel's voice echoed down the stairwell. "He's here. I heard him." Emily gripped the doorframe, terror surging through her again. Whoever the intruder was, they weren't just passing by. They had chosen her building. Her apartment, and worse, they weren't done yet. The building seemed to hold its breath. Emily remained at her doorway, frozen, her eyes fixed on the shadowed stairwell where Daniel had disappeared. She clutched the blanket tighter around her shoulders, her pulse racing. Every creak of the floorboards above sent shivers racing down her spine. Then came Daniel's voice again, firm and commanding. "Stop. Don't move." A heavy crash followed. Wood splintering, boots thudding, a struggle. Emily's heart leapt into her throat. "Dan," she called out, unable to stop herself. She heard grunts, a muffled cry, and then silence. She stood at the threshold, torn between fear and the desperate need to know if Daniel was safe. Finally, his voice rang out. "Emily, it's okay. I've got him." Relief washed over her so strongly her knees nearly gave out. Moments later, Daniel appeared at the top of the stairs, one hand gripping a man's arm, the other holding his weapon steady. The intruder stumbled under Daniel's grip, a man dressed in dark clothes, his face pale and tense. His eyes flicked toward Emily, and she felt the cold weight of his stare pierce through her. Daniel marched him down the steps, keeping his gun aimed firmly. "You're under arrest," he growled, his voice echoing through the hall. The man didn't resist, but he kept his gaze locked on Emily until Daniel shoved him toward the officers who had returned to back him up. The building seemed to hold its breath. Emily remained at her doorway, frozen, her eyes fixed on the shadowed stairwell where Daniel had disappeared. She clutched the blanket tighter around her shoulders, her pulse racing. Every creak of the floorboards above sent shivers racing down her spine. Then came Daniel's voice again, firm and commanding. "Stop. Don't move." A heavy crash followed, wood splintering, boots thudding, a struggle. Emily's heart leapt into her throat. "Dan," she called out, unable to stop herself. She heard grunts, a muffled cry, and then silence. She stood at the threshold, torn between fear and the desperate need to know if Daniel was safe. Finally, his voice rang out. "Emily, it's okay. I've got him." Relief washed over her so strongly her knees nearly gave out. Moments later, Daniel appeared at the top of the stairs, one hand gripping a man's arm, the other holding his weapon steady. The intruder stumbled under Daniel's grip, a man dressed in dark clothes, his face pale and tense. His eyes flicked toward Emily, and she felt the cold weight of his stare pierce through her. Daniel marched him down the steps, keeping his gun aimed firmly. "You're under arrest," he growled, his voice echoing through the hall. The man didn't resist, but he kept his gaze locked on Emily until Daniel shoved him toward the officers who had returned to back him up. The police took the intruder in handcuffs, reading him his rights. Emily stepped back as they led the man outside, her body trembling. Daniel returned to her side quickly, holstering his weapon and scanning her face. "Are you hurt?" "No," she whispered, shaking her head. "But Dan, why me? Why was he here?" Daniel's jaw tightened. "He had tools on him. Lockpicks. And a notebook with your name and address inside." Emily's breath caught. "He was watching me." "Yes," Daniel admitted, his voice softer now, though the steel in his eyes remained. "This wasn't random. He picked you. We don't know why yet, but we will." Tears welled in her eyes, and before she could stop herself, she leaned into him, her forehead pressing against his chest. Daniel's arms circled her gently but firmly, steadying her trembling body. "It's over now," he whispered, his voice close to her ear. "He's not going to hurt you. Not while I'm here." For a moment, Emily let herself breathe, safe in the shelter of his embrace. She knew there were still questions: why the intruder had targeted her, what he wanted, and whether he was acting alone. The answers would come, in time. But in that moment, with the rain still pattering against the windows and Daniel holding her close, Emily realized something else. Fear had brought them here. But trust was what would carry her forward. She pulled back slightly, looking up at him, her voice unsteady but sincere. "Thank you, Dan, for saving me." His expression softened, and though he didn't speak right away, his eyes told her everything she needed to know. They lingered in the quiet, the chaos outside fading, leaving only the two of them in the small circle of light. The night had been filled with silent footsteps, shadows, and fear. But as dawn slowly began to rise over Portland, Emily felt the darkness finally lift. She wasn't alone, and maybe, just maybe, something new was beginning between her and the man who had always been more than just a friend. The silent steps in the night had ended. But a new story for Emily and Daniel was only just beginning.